Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 2 and today is our presentation and our material about population and sample. Before we start the presentation, let me introduce our member groups. First, my name is Dwi Yuliantirham and my friends' names are Lia Hidayati and Ilham Rizki. For the first material will be presented by me. Okay, for the first is definition of population. It includes all the elements from the data set and measurable characteristics of the population such as mean and standard deviation are known as a parameter. For example, all people living in India indicates the population of India. And there are different types of population, and let us discuss one by one the types. For the first type is finite population. The finite population is also known as a countable population in which the population can be counted. In other words, it is defined as the population of all the individuals or objects that are finite. For statistical analysis, the finite population is more advantageous than the infinite population. Examples of finite populations are employees of a company, potential consumer in a market. Okay, for the second types is infinite population. The infinite population is also known as an uncountable population in which the counting of units in the population is not possible. Example of infinite population is the number of germs in the patient's body is uncountable. Now, the third types is existent population. The existent population is defined as the population of concrete individuals. In other words, the populations whose unit is available in solid forms is known as existent population. Examples are books, students, and etc. Okay, for the last types is hypothetical population. The population in which whose unit is not available in solid form is known as the hypothetical population. A population consists of sets of observations, objects, etc. that are all something in common. In some situations, the populations are only hypothetical. Examples are an outcome of rolling the dice and outcome of tossing a coin. For the next is the definition of sample. It includes one or more observations that are drawn from the population, and the measurable characteristic of a sample is a statistic. Sampling is the process of selecting the sample from the population. For example, some people living in India is the sample of the population. Basically, there are two types of sampling. For the first type is probability sampling. In probability sampling, the population units cannot be selected at the discretion of the researcher. This can be dealt with following certain procedures which will ensure that every unit of the population consists of one fixed probability being included in the sample. Such a method is also called random sampling. Some of the techniques used for probability sampling are: first, simple random sampling, cluster sampling, stratified sampling, disproportionate sampling, proportionate sampling, optimum allocation stratified sampling, and for the last is multi-stage sampling. Okay, for the second types is non-probability sampling. In non-probability sampling, the population units can be selected at the discretion of the researcher. The samples will use the human judgments for selecting units and has no theoretical basis for estimating the characteristics of the population. Some of the techniques used for non-probability sampling are: first, quota sampling, judgment sampling, and for the last is purposive sampling. Okay, that's all my material, and the next material will be presented by Lia Hidayati.
Okay, so here I want to continue the next material. It's about the differences between populations and sample. Okay, here there is comparison. It's about meaning, includes characteristic, data collections, and about focus on. Okay, for the population meaning is about collections of all the units or elements that post common characteristic. And then for the sample meaning is about a subgroup of the members of the population. So population includes about each and every element of a group. So for the sample only includes a handful of units of population. So population, the characteristic from the population is about a parameter, and then for the sample, the characteristic for the sample is statistic. So population, the data collection. The data collection from the population is about complete enumeration or conscious. So for the sample, the data collection is about sampling or sampling survey. So population focus on identification of the characteristic, and then for the sample is focused on making inferences about the population. Okay, for the next slide, it's about population parameter versus sample statistic and sampling error. Okay, when we collect data from a population or a sample, there are various measurements and numbers we can calculate from the data. Okay, a parameter is a measure that describes the whole population. A statistic is a measure that describes the sample, so we can use estimations or hypothesis testing to estimate how likely it's a sample statistic differs from the population parameter. So for the sampling error, a sampling error is the difference between a population parameter and sample statistic. So sampling error happens even we use a randomly selected sample. This is because random samples are not identical to the population in terms of numerical measure like mean and standard deviation. Because the aim of scientific research is to generalize findings from the sample to the population, we want the sampling error to be low, so we can reduce sampling error by increasing the sample size.
Okay, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this video, I'll explain for the last material of our group. We talk about collecting data from a population and collecting data from a sample. Collecting data from a population, it means you collect data from a population when your research question needs an extensive amount of data or information about every member of the population is available. You use population data when the data pool is small and cooperative to give all the required information. For a large population, you use sampling to represent part of the population from which it is hard to collect data. And from collecting data from a sample, it means samples are used when the population is large, scattered, or it is hard to collect data on individual instances within it. You can then use a small sample of the population to make overall hypothesis. Samples should be randomly collected and should represent the entire population and every class within. To ensure this statistical method such as probability sampling are also to collect are used to collect random sample from every class within the population. This will reduce sampling bias and increase validity. Consider the polls conducted during selection season to gauge the public support for various political parties all over the nation. It is impossible to ask millions of voters who their preferred candidate is, so they collect the opinions of a few hundred or thousand people from different sectors of the voting population. And that's all for my explanation. Thank you for watching.